Thank you for joining me today. I am looking forward to this question and answer session. And I also want to say thank you to all the people who took the time to submit questions. It's imperative for me to know what keeps people up at night in order to focus my efforts on creating meaningful change. Running for office in a global pandemic has highlighted for me one of the core reasons I want to serve. The reason I am running is because of all the relationships I've built in this community. And now more than ever, I recognize the need for nurturing those relationships. The policies we craft and the laws we enact should always center around what is best for the future of our state and represent the communities in which we live. And especially now, I believe Arizona can do better. For those of you who are joining us in order to learn more about me, I'll give a brief introduction and then we'll move into answering the questions that were submitted. We should be wrapping this session up within 45 minutes or less. Just depends on whether or not I get carried away. My name is Stephanie Stahl Hamilton, and I am a Democrat running for the State House of Representatives in Legislative District 10. I am the daughter of educators who began their teaching careers in northeastern Arizona. I am married to a third-generation Arizona educator and the mother of 3 children who are starting to make their way in this world. My oldest is a senior at Tucson High Magnet School with plans to attend the U of A in the fall. By training and vocation, I am an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA and have served on staff at St. Mark's Presbyterian Church as the Director of Youth Ministry and was the Executive Director of Montlure Presbyterian Church Camp, a summer camp that served children, teenagers, and young adults throughout the state of Arizona. My calling has always been to serve children, teenagers, and their families. And it is with this lens of serving children that I became involved in my neighborhood school when my oldest child began kindergarten. My first PTO meeting quickly translated into being the school site counselor, coordinating the after-school garden program, coaching, and eventually substitute teaching. As my involvement increased, so did my awareness of our state's failure to invest in its future. In fact, I became keenly aware of the systematic defunding of our public schools. Coupled with a continual struggle to find quality and affordable health care for our 3 very busy and growing children, it felt like our days were filled with anxiety and it was challenging to make ends meet. And because we've been consumed with providing for our family of 3, there hasn't been the resources necessary to invest in our children's future. I knew we were stretched and could only assume that we weren't the only family. Turns out our story and experience is not unique. And similarly, our state's budget does not reflect the needs or priorities of the majority of the people in our state. I am passionate about investing in our future and creating solutions that use our resources in sustainable ways, ensuring a great quality of life for generations to come. So let's go ahead and get started with the questions. Our first question reads, what will be your budget priorities in the light of the impact COVID-19 has had on our state? And obviously that's a very timely question. And a year ago, when I started thinking about running for office, I took the time to do a series of listening sessions within our community and within the LD to hear what was on the minds of our people. And I would say that right now, because of this pandemic, our priorities do need to shift. And this is an excellent question because one of the things that the legislature does is focus on our budget, our state's budget. So obviously, nobody knows how this is going to play out. Nobody knows the economic toll this is going to take on our state, let alone our families, our immediate communities. And so everything that is done from here on out should be with an eye of providing the most very basic of needs in our state. We should make sure that our medical professionals and the medical profession has what it needs to not only glean information, but also develop the resources necessary for treatment and be able to have enough space to care for the fallout from this pandemic. So, I think that's first and foremost should be to give our medical community. Secondly, I think we need to look at our infrastructure and how we are able to reach and care for all the people throughout our state. Some of the more remote places in our state may be more vulnerable because they don't have readily access to medical care. And what are we doing to reach everybody at the far corners of our state? Third, I think housing is a critical issue. If people are unemployed, there is no income. There needs to be some resources put into place and some compassion for people to have safe spaces in which to live so that this pandemic does not continue to spread. So we need to have an eye on housing and what that needs to look like in our communities. I think another population that we need to pay attention to are people who are incarcerated. What do those spaces look like, and how are we providing for care and medical care, daily care, medical care for our folks who are incarcerated? And I definitely think emergency funding will be necessary. Those are the things that come to mind. Just trying to keep a lens as broad as possible, recognizing the ways in which our society functions and making readily available resources to care for people who may not be in a position to continue to care for themselves. Moving on, I'll take the next question, which reads, what, in your opinion, are the 2 or 3 most pressing issues facing Arizona right now, and what would you do in your capacity as a legislature to address those issues? Pandemic aside, always the first and foremost, and is one of the most driving forces for why I am running, is our education system. And truly, in those listening sessions that I attended, that was the number one concern for everybody who showed up and was willing to share their thoughts. Education is at the forefront of everything we do in our state, and it is in the minds of everybody. And so I won't let up in that arena. I have spent quite a bit of time digging into our state's budget and the ways in which we fund education, but also with an eye on our policies, our educational policy and how that affects our children. Our public schools are required to teach all abilities and all learners. And with that, some areas require more resources in order for our students to be successful. And with an eye to the future, education is one of the best investments we can make in order to make sure that we have a sustainable future for our state. Second, I think healthcare is a very pressing issue. And I know just from my own family experience, as I shared earlier, how hard it has been for me to be able, as a parent, to be able to provide affordable quality healthcare for my own children. And I know I'm not alone. And this is an issue that spans the all ages, you know. And I think we can start with prenatal care. We can start there, and we then can carry that up to end of life care. I think within that, we also need to pay particular attention to our children in the foster care system, our inmates, and um, people with challenging mental health issues. I think there's plenty of room for growth and room to create changes there. And I think the third most pressing issue would be, and of course, none of these other policies make sense unless we admit that climate change is real and we do something to protect the environment in our state. We have a finite we have finite resources that we're using in the way of water. And we have made steps in the right direction, but we can do better with our water resources. And we need to take a look at investing more money and infrastructure in renewable sources of energy, such as solar and wind power, and also thinking about electric cars. All of those things are something that I think Arizona can do better and create it enables us to utilize our resources in ways that will preserve our resources for the future and for future generations. Question number 3. Governor Doug Ducey has been clear that he wants to make sure Arizona is open for business, not only for existing Arizona companies, but also to potential new businesses for the state. What do you think the Arizona legislature needs to do to help facilitate this goal of making Arizona the place to attract or grow a business? Please give specifics. Well, I would say education. I'll go right back to education. Arizona has a reputation for not having quality public schools. Now, I beg to differ. I know a lot of educators who give their all to their daily work and are incredibly creative and professional and resourceful. However, they have to make do with very little, which increases the stresses on their jobs. And because we do not have enough money funding our public schools, the outcome of that is overcrowded classrooms. Not enough money goes back into capital, making sure our schools are safe learning environments. We do not have upgraded technology. And at times, our HVAC systems are a little temperamental. Our school buses don't always work. These are things that are necessary in order for our educators to focus and be about the business of engaging young minds and preparing our students for the future. So that being said, also within education, we know that in Arizona, there is a gap in the workforce. There are plenty of jobs available, but we do not have the trained personnel to fill those jobs. And so we can look at programs like our career and technical education programs that train skilled labor for the workforce. We need to make higher education more accessible so that we are turning out professionals who can fill the workforce. Why would a business move to our state if they know that we don't have the personnel to fill the jobs? That doesn't bode well for those companies. Secondly, I think we need to not rely solely on tax breaks or tax incentives. It does not benefit our communities when companies move here and they do not invest their resources in the environment in which they are rooted. There needs to be a partnership and a relationship between our business community and our uh, communities. I think there can be ways in which businesses are required to invest with the knowledge that there will be um, skilled labor and young people entering into the workforce to fill the jobs that are available. Creating tax cuts only puts strains on our general budget and limits our resources and what we can do to make our communities thriving communities. Let's move on. The Groundwater Management Act applies to the state's metropolitan counties and ensures a 100-year water supply as a condition of development. Does rural Arizona need similar protections? Why or why not? Boy, this is a real critical question. And we do not have consistent regulation with our water resources throughout the state of Arizona. We have 5 management areas which tend to speak to our more urban areas, but you're right. There is not the same expectation or regulation for our rural areas in Arizona. And in those areas, we have mining, we have farming, and we have ranching. All of those things require water. And the effect that has taken on our state is that the areas that are not within the 5 management areas, the regions which do have regulations, water is allocated and in very controlled measures. But in the rural areas, groundwater pumping is available at the landowner's discretion, which has resulted in the overpumping of groundwater, and we don't have the reciprocity that happens with groundwater fueling our streams and our streams recharging our groundwater. So there is an imbalance in our water system, and we know that if we are not careful, we will not have water available for all the residents in our state. And in a state like Arizona, that is not in our best interest, nor does it create a sense of security for the future. So most certainly, I think a balance needs to be had between rural and our more urban areas, and how we're working to make sure that we are smart with our water usage. Let's see. What is your opinion on the tuition charged by Arizona's public universities? What, if anything, should the legislature do about it? Yeah, this one hits close to home for me as we are preparing for our oldest to attend the U of A. Now, I'll tell you, when my father-in-law graduated from high school, he grew up in Safford. He attended ASU, and he was sharing with us just this past Christmas that when he attended, because he was an Arizona resident, his tuition was free. And mind you, that was really helpful because he was raised by a single mom who was a teacher. And yet he was able to go to college, get a degree, and enter the workforce. And it's hard now. It's hard now for me to think of my oldest child, the dependent of 2 parents, having a hard time to pay tuition at a state public university. This goes against our Constitution, which most of us know that education should be nearly as free and affordable as possible. We're not doing that. Now, There is a relationship between the Board of Regents and the state legislature. The Board of Regents is the body that determines tuition rates and also makes the recommendations whether or not to freeze tuition or to raise tuition. And then I believe it's the legislature who acts on those recommendations. I'd have to say that we can do better. And why I know that we can do better is because in this state, every year we give away more in tax breaks and tax credits than we collect in taxes for our general budget. The resources are there. And I believe that if we want our young people to stay in the state and we want a trained workforce, we need to make education accessible and affordable for those young people. It's incredible how quickly tuition has increased just within the last 15 years. And personally, I don't think it makes continuing ed readily available or accessible for our general population, and we do need to do something about that. I like this question. What is your stance on reproductive health, and what do you plan on doing in your capacity as a state legislator if you are elected? When I am elected, it will be made known. I stand firmly in the space of reproductive health being a person's choice and decision for themselves and their primary care provider. There should not be limits based upon sex, gender, economic status, race. There should be no determining factor of why a person doesn't have access and the ability to choose their reproductive health. A couple of years ago, found myself sitting in the Democratic caucus when a bill was being discussed regarding emergency medical personnel needing to be present in abortion rooms. And I found it very troubling, because those moments when we're looking at our reproductive health, and whether it starts with birth control or it is in with terminating a pregnancy, those are such very private and personal matters, and sometimes not easy choices to make. And for the state to step in and mandate a person, or limit a person's decision and ability to act, I find very frustrating and certainly very wrong. So I will always defend a person's freedom to choose their reproductive health. Okay, moving on. Do you support the LGBTQ plus community? And if so, how would you use your position to help the LGBT community? I am an ally. And I have to say, this last legislative session, it has been very troubling, especially for me. And I've shared again and again and again my passion for serving children and teenagers. And it has been so very troubling to me how grown adults have been attacking our transgender youth. Young people who know who they are and are trying their best to grow into their adult selves, struggling at times in a world or a community that tells them they don't belong. And it frustrates me greatly that our state legislature has stepped in to create laws that are very detrimental to especially right now, our transgender youth. That being said, you should know that I am a strong ally and have been able to do my part in supporting LGBTQ weddings. I have been privileged and humbled to officiate several weddings of people who have been in long-time committed relationships. In fact, the first wedding I ever officiated, the couple had been together for over 30 years. I was amazed by their story, their commitment, and their love for one another. And it was a gift to me to be able to stand with them and help make their union legal. People are people. Love is love. We all have certain inalienable rights. And for me, it's as simple as that. I will say that locally, at the local level, I was appointed by the TUSD school board to work on our family life curriculum. And that was upgrading the curriculum from 4th grade through 12th grade in high school for our children within the district. And one of the most contentious issues that we had to deal with centered around our LGBTQ community. And there were a few other things there, but I was proud to stand with the members of our community and say that all of this needs to be acknowledged and presented in such a way that all members of our society know that they are celebrated in who they are and that they belong. Let's see. Governor Ducey said Prop 123, oh boy, that was a contentious one, was the first step for restoring school funding. Do you see a need for additional steps? What should they be? I've been very clear and very upfront in saying that I do believe we need more, we definitely need more funding. And let's step back to 2018 when the Arizona Educators United really stood up and took the governor to task on funding for education. Not only there were 5 asks, and one of them was partially filled. But not only were we talking about educator salary, but we are talking about restoring the capital funding. As I mentioned before, our buildings are in a shambles. Our school buses don't always work. Our HVAC systems are temperamental. There is not enough money to educate the whole child in money for music, money for PE, money for the arts, all of these things that help our children's brains become engaged and alive and grow and celebrates the gifts and talents that all of our children have. Our support staff do not make a living wage, and these members of our education community help make sure that every child requires a quality education. So we need to do something about that. And then our educators, our teachers, and the reason I'm using the word educator is because the definition of teacher does need to be broadened. Every person in our district that touches the life of a child helps to make the classroom work. Each person that does their part is what makes our public schools strong. So our teachers, a few years back, it was determined by the state legislature that a certificate was not necessary for adults to enter the classroom. That disrespects the profession, and it disrespects the hours and the training our educators have invested in order to hone their craft. Now is not the time to lower the bar. Now is the time to raise the bar and give our educators the respect they deserve and have high standards for our public schools. So yes, I believe that more definitely needs to be done. And we have barely scratched the surface. And a lot of people talk about restoring funding to the levels of 2008. Well, it is 2020, and I think restoring funding to the levels of 2008 is very short-sighted. I think we need to take a look at the world in front of us, know where what is necessary to prepare our young people to enter the world before them, and invest in the ways in which will prepare them for that so that they can go on and have productive and successful lives. Let's see. Oh, here's a fun one. What is your favorite EG's flavor? Well, typically, my favorite EG's flavor happens to fall in my birthday month, and it is Orange Dream. So I always look forward to the month when I can stop by EG's and get an Orange Dream. I think I have talked a lot, and I think it's probably time to start wrapping things up. And in closing, I would like to say, my passion is readily available. You can see that I care about our community. I care deeply. I care about how we are allocating our resources and how we are looking to the future. It is critical in this position while I will be representing Legislative District 10, it's critical to know that the decisions that get made represent and reflect the whole state. And one of the things that I can promise you is that I will always come down on the side of justice and compassion and common sense. I really appreciate you all tuning in. It's been a pleasure to have this question and answer period. And who knows, perhaps we may do this in the future. Either way, I'm sure I will see you, whether it's virtual or via the internet, out on the campaign trail. Have a good day. Thanks.